Bienvenue au webinaire d'aujourd'hui sur la diversification, rotation des cultures et semences et légumineuses. Welcome to the Legumes webinar.
Welcome to the Legumes
diversification,
Diversification Crop Rotation and Seed Supply,
and seed supply.
the webinar.
Nous allons commencer avec quelques détails sur la traduction simultanée. We are going to get started with some information about the simultaneous translation.
Bonjour tout le monde. Alors, la première chose, c'est de sélectionner l'icône en bas de votre écran. Il y a un bouton Interprétation et là, vous allez pouvoir choisir français ou anglais. Et on vous recommande aussi de mettre en sourdine l'audio original. So you'll see the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. It's a globe, and you'll be able to choose French or English language. And we also recommend to mute the original audio.
And so now I'm testing the English channel for everyone who's currently taking the interpretation. So see if you can hear me, and if you can hear my voice, that means everything's working. If you're joining by phone, dialing in by phone, then that will not work. The interpretation will not work.
Téléphone, vous n'allez pas pouvoir avoir accès à la traduction simultanée. La première partie sera en anglais, puis la deuxième partie sera en français.
While we are meeting virtually today, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home, the land that we live on, work with, and plant our seeds into. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Indigenous people that call this land home. Today, I am joining this webinar from my home office on Treaty 6 land, which spans across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. I live in a community just outside of Edmonton where I am neighbors with the Alexander Cree, Alexis Nakota Sioux, Enoch Cree, and Paul. As part of our understanding and connecting with the land that we are on, I encourage you to learn about the history of the land you are in relationship with by visiting, we have two websites for you that I think Becca is going to throw into the chat. One of them is called Whose Land, and the other one is called Native Land. So those are in the chat, and I encourage you to take a look at those. And I also encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and where you're joining us from. One of the strengths of the seed community and the feedback that we hear time and time again is how incredible it is that presenters at events and gatherings are so open and honest with their stories. With that in mind, I want to mention that the goal for this event is to create a safe and engaging space. Presenters and participants may share some personal experiences, which requires vulnerability, and we hope that we feel valued and respected. If you're someone who tends to not speak a lot, please move up into the role of speaking more. And if you tend to speak a lot, please move up into the role of listening more. Please reach out if you have any concerns or ideas about how we can do this better. You can private message me or any of the regional coordinators after the event. It is our role to make sure that everyone feels safe and able to engage, and our team is committed to acting in support of this. So there are a few ways that you can engage during this webinar. We want to make sure there's lots of discussion. There's lots of juicy content that we have here today. So first, as I mentioned earlier, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself in the chat. You can introduce, your name, where you grow, as well as if there's a farm or group that you're connected with. You can also make sure that the name on the bottom of your Zoom screen is correct, and also that it includes a farm that you're part of or an organization that you're part of. And so you can do that by looking at your little window where you see your video, and there's 3 dots in the corner that you can click, and then you should get an option that says rename, and you can type your name and your organization there. You can choose to have your video on or off. You can do that in the bottom left corner. There's a video camera there that you can do, and that would be great, especially during question period if you're comfortable doing that. As well, to make sure that there's no background noises, if you could stay muted while you're not speaking, that'd be great. If you'd like to ask a question, there are 2 ways you can do this. So first, you can use the chat by clicking on the chat button in the Zoom toolbar. I will read your name along with your question. But if you'd like to ask your question anonymously, you can send a chat message privately to me. And second, you can raise your hand and then ask your question over video or audio. To do this, click the reaction button and then find the raise hand button. This will indicate to me that you have a question. And when your question is up, I'll ask you to unmute and you can choose to turn on your video to speak directly to the presenter. We'll be having a question period at the end of both presentations, so we can go over this again then. If you have any technical difficulties, sometimes turning off your video helps. And if you're still having trouble, feel free to send a message privately to me and I can see if I can help. So yesterday, about midday, we put together this graph showing kind of roughly how many people had signed up in the different regions. So you can see here, we have quite a few people from Quebec, Ontario, and Prairies. And we also just wanted to get a sense of what people's connections to legumes are and maybe why they decided to join this webinar. So we are going to pull up a quick poll. And here we're asking which term best describes you. So your options are small scale grower, mid-scale grower, large scale grower. And we understand that that can be different in different regions, like the number of acres. We also have breeder, processor, vendor, industry, agricultural professionals. That could include government and other. So I'll just give that maybe 30 seconds. Awesome. So I think we can share those poll results. So we have quite a few small scale growers here, some medium scale, one breeders here, processor, and a few agricultural professionals. That's great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So again, I am excited to invite you and welcome you to this Legumes webinar. I don't think I actually introduced myself earlier, but I'm Tiara Stokes and I'm the Prairie Regional Coordinator with the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. I believe we have all or almost all of the regional coordinators here. So we have Rebecca in Ontario with EFAO, Caitlin in the Maritimes with Acorn, David in BC with Farm Folk City Folk, and Hugo with Bauta in Quebec. So if you have any questions or need some help with any tech, feel free to private message them and they can help you out today. So why are we talking about legumes today? Legumes are increasingly in high demand, whether by farmers for their crop rotation and nitrogen fixating ability, or by consumers as an alternative source of protein and iron. For growers, legumes are a versatile crop that can be used for cash crops, green manures, cover cropping, or intercropping. They're also a way to diversify your crop rotation, which in turn diversifies the biodiversity on your farm, marketing opportunities, weed management strategies, and more. However, there is a lack of readily available information about niche and emerging legume crops, in addition to challenges in seed availability, especially certified organic seed. That is why we've put together this webinar with Neil Whatley and Aitre Akpakuma. In this webinar, you'll learn about 5 legume crops, why you might want to consider them for your crop rotation, how to grow them, and the status of their seed availability. So as I mentioned earlier, how this will work is we will have the speakers present back to back, and then we have a big chunk of time for a question period where we can have a discussion about these legume crops. So I'll ask you to save your questions for the question period. If you're worried you're going to forget your question, you can just type it in the chat and we'll make sure to ask it in the question period. So with that, we can get started with our first presentation. Neil Whatley will be presenting first on chickpeas, fava beans, and lentils. Neil has 35 years of experience with crop-based agriculture and community development. He has worked with agronomy, applied research, and rural development in Western Canada and overseas. Raised on a farm in Saskatchewan, after high school, Neil co-managed the farm for several years. He worked as a rural developer and systems agronomist in West Africa and Latin America. He managed the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers Farmer Participatory Applied Research Program. Neil worked with the government of Alberta for 13 years as a soils and crop agronomist. Currently, Neil is the crop specialist with the Agriculture Research and Extension Council of Alberta and serves on the steering committee with the Rockefeller Foundation funded Prairie Food Vision Network. Neil has a bachelor's degree in crop science from the University of Saskatchewan and a master's degree in rural social studies and empowerment-based adult learning from the University of Regina. Again, if you have any questions for Neil, hold on to them to the end of the presentation or type it in the chat so we can get to it during question period. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Neil.
Okay, so I've share my screen here, I guess.
Awesome, we can see your screen.
It's all good. I can't see the top part here. I'll just X out of that. Maybe that'll work. And how do I sort of, I don't want to eliminate you people. There we go on the right. Okay, now I need to get back up. There, thank you. Thank you, Tiara. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and to the other sponsors and organizers of this great program you've got going here. So we're talking legumes, diversification, crop rotation, and seed supply. I've been asked to talk about pulse crops, specifically lentil, chickpea, and fava bean. So I'm a annual crop specialist. I work with cereals, oil seeds, and pulses. So when it comes to legumes, I'm primarily a pulse crop specialist. These are grain legumes. They're grown annually for grain. I'm not a perennial perennial legume specialist, nor a pasture or forage legume specialist. So just before we get going here, I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work in Treaty 6, the original homeland of the Cree, Blackfoot, Nakota, Tsuut'ina, Chippewa, and Métis peoples. So I need to get rid of that X there again. It keeps showing up. Then I can transfer. Okay. I just thought I'd start off by talking about the adaptation of these crops. I was told to speak about them and on the Canadian prairies. So we're looking at fava bean, which is really likes a lot of water, 15 inches of rainfall during the growing season and cooler climates. So, and that map of the prairies there, you'll see the black soil zone. It's the black and gray are the northernmost regions of the Canadian prairies for crop production. And fava bean, by and large, is grown in the black soil zone. Lentil is more drought tolerant. It's been mostly grown in the brown and dark brown soil zones, the southern two regions there pointed out on the map. But it's starting to penetrate the thin black soil zone, and I'll explain why a little bit later. Chickpea is a very drought tolerant crop and is a very serious disease. So it's been mostly grown in the brown soil zone. That's the area that says left bridge to Swift Current, that whole area. But it's now penetrating the dark brown soil zone, and I'll explain why a little later. Benefits of pulse crops and crop rotations. I was told to talk about the benefits of each of these crops, but some of them I've lumped together because they're all the same. So benefits, one is soil, water, and nutrient use efficiency in a crop rotation. So we'll notice that they were talking about rooting depth here. And so lentil and fava bean, they go down fairly shallow into the soil profile with their roots 0.6 meters to almost a meter, 0.75 meters, so 2 feet to 2.5 feet, whereas wheat and oil seeds and actually other cereals will go down 0.9 to 1.2 meters. So we're talking 3 to 4 feet, and cereals will actually go down 6 feet deep. So you can see on that diagram on the right, I tried to portray some different rooting zones. So when you grow lentil and fava bean in rotation with wheat and cereals, you get extraction of soil, water, and nutrients from different soil levels. And so this is really this helps to conserve soil, water, and nutrients in the soil profile. Um, Another benefit, which I was actually asked to talk about, is nitrogen fixation. I think it's fairly common. A lot of people know a lot about nitrogen fixation, but I'll just give a brief overview here. Pulse crops grow with a beneficial soil bacteria called rhizobia. And what happens is that we need to inoculate these crop seeds before we plant them in the spring. And so we inoculate with the proper rhizobia species. And we say proper because rhizobia has distinct species for lentil, field pea, chickpea, and fava. They're different. So you have to make sure you get the right inoculant. What this rhizobia does is it activates nodule formation in the roots. So I got a dry mouth here, so I have to take a sip of water now and then. So these roots, they form like a little factory on the roots of these pulse crops, and they convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant available nitrogen. So what we mean about that is that this is atmospheric nitrogen that's in the air pockets in the soil. So these roots go out, this rhizobia that are on these little nodule factories. They take N2 from the air and they convert it into N3 or ammonium, which is plant available. And this whole process begins 3 weeks after the crops germinate. And this nitrogen fixation occurs with lentil, pea, chickpea, and bean right up to the flowering stage. Once these crops start to go to seed, form seeds, the nitrogen fixation system stops. So with fava bean, it goes all season long, right to physiological maturity. It's advantageous to plant legumes or these pulses into soil that's low in nitrogen. So anything less than 20 pounds per acre actual nitrogen in the soil is good. If it's above that, this rhizobia gets lazy and doesn't fix nitrogen. Now the rhizobia is pretty amazing. It fixes up to 80% of the crop's nitrogen needs, often over 100 pounds an acre, depending on the crop. An indication of nitrogen fixation effectiveness is redness inside the nodule. So in June or early July, you want to pull some of these roots up and cut them open, cut the nodules open. And if they're red inside, it means that it's doing a good job. If it's not, then you have to sort of reflect back and see what happened. Maybe you got a bad batch of inoculant or something like that. Another interesting thing about these legumes is they promote beneficial, another soil microorganism beneficial one called arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi. So I'll just call this AM fungi for simplicity's sake here. And what this is, it's a beneficial fungus, and it also associates with pulse roots. There's a vast network of thread-like microscopic channels. That's what this AM fungi does. It forms a vast network of thread-like microscopic channels between the plant roots and the soil. So the picture in the right-hand side at the top there, the diagram, the plant on the left does not have AM fungi. The plant on the right does have AM fungi. You can see that the roots are much more vast with this microscopic fungi. Oops, I got to X out. Every time somebody enters, it seems like I got to X them out. There we go. No problem. 1 gram of topsoil actually contains 100 meters of AM fungi microscopic thread. So it's a vast, vast network. Research is going real strong on this right now, but research, maybe Ayatri can talk more about this, but I think research has just been going on about 15 or 20 years, maybe longer with this, but we're really getting some good research results now and finding out a lot more about soil microbiology. And so what these AM fungi do is they increase the uptake of nutrients and water, and they especially activate plant available phosphorus. Pulses help to break down rock phosphate anyways and help the uptake of phosphorus, which is an immobile nutrient, and it's actually difficult in organic farming to get enough phosphorus. So if you have these pulses in your crop rotation, it's quite beneficial. Oh, no, I can't go forward. There we go. So actually, the AM fungi also help, of course, with drought tolerance because you've got a lot more extensive rooting system with these AM fungi. Um, I'll just mention something is that oil seeds like canola do not associate well with AM fungi. Pulses have a strong relationship with AM fungi, and cereals and many other crops do have good relationships. But if you got oil seeds, they actually repel these things. So it's important to, if you have oil seeds in your rotation, it's even more important to have pulses or other types of legumes in your crop rotation. AM fungi also help with biocontrol, the increased disease resistance of crops. These little microscopic sticky strings, they hold the soil particles together, so you get higher soil quality, you get better root penetration of your crops, better aeration, um, better water infiltration, and they also stimulate the growth of decomposing microorganisms. So we've always got organisms in the soil that are breaking down all our crop residue, all the straw, roots, etc., from previous crops, and these enhance this as well, and this in ultimately leads to improved nitrogen release into the soil. So another pulse benefit is that they break the disease cycle of other crops in rotation. So I just use the example of cereals here. So diseases like cereal leaf diseases, fusarium head blight, and ergot. They also break the insect cycles of other crops. And again, with cereals, that would be insects like wheat midge and sawfly. More pulse benefits are that they increase the value of wheat in a crop rotation. So when we're growing wheat for export market and for human consumption, we want to get as high protein as we can. So what pulses do is when they break down the next couple of years after they've been grown, they're in the soil and they're decomposing. They allow a flush of nitrogen to go through that soil and help the next couple of crops. And if you grow wheat the next couple of years, it actually will help you to increase the protein content of your wheat. And of course, growers know that you get a premium price for higher protein wheat. And so it's noteworthy as well. I should mention that if you in conventional farming, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is only available to the crop for 4 to 6 weeks after seeding. So having these pulses in the rotation are important to get a nice flush of nitrogen for your benefit of your future cereals in the next couple of years. Another benefit, of course, is market. Some growers kind of hold off and grow these pulses when the price is high, but there are many, many growers now that include pulses as main commodities because even when the price is low, they notice that it's important to grow it for the well-being of their other crops. A new thing that's kind of happening on the prairies, we got a lot of fractionation plants going up and just being started. So henceforth, we'll be making growers will be able to make more money by selling pulse crops into the value-added processing market. You can read lots about this. I won't elaborate on it right now, but there's, they can replace plastics. They can help with they can help with added protein to other foods, things like that. Oops, that's not working. Here we go. Where to find seed? I was asked to look into this a bit. So lentil, chickpea, and fava bean. Where to find seed? For organic growers, it's most common to get the seed from other growers. Um, Certified organic isn't real popular. You can use this ecological seed finder though, and I've pasted the drop down menu on the right there, just so you have a look at it. That's a seed finder. Canadian Organic Growers has an organic seed directory there where you can find seed and you can contact your pulse buyer. Often your buyer will know where to find seed as well. And if you have to go to get conventional seed, you can find this at Canadian Seed Growers Association website. That's that drop down menu that I've inserted on the right there. It's called seedlocator.net. And of course, the provincial seed guides are also pretty handy. So you got Seed Alberta, Seed Manitoba, and Seed Saskatchewan. Got them in booklet form and online. So I'll mention a few things about lentil. I'll talk first about market classes and varieties. There are many market classes here that you can choose from. Small reds are popular with conventional growers, and some organic growers are growing them as well. And we call them reds not because the seed coat is red, they're actually brown, as you can see on the right-hand side there, but the cotyledons inside are red. So that's why we call it red lentil. CDC Maxim has been a variety that's performed really well in the last 8 to 10 years. Another market class is large greens, and this is the old Laird. Dr. Slinkard was the one that introduced pulses into the prairies about 40 years ago, and so he had Laird and Eston. Laird was a large one, so these are comparable in size to the old Laird varieties. They have yellow cotyledons, and I really want to mention this CDC Green Star variety, especially to the organic growers, because it's got vigorous growth. Lentils don't do well against weeds. They don't compete well. So, but this one actually, I've talked a lot to the breeder and I've seen it, and it grows very vigorously. So it helps with weed suppression. Another market class is French green. It's got a yellow cotyledon. CDC marble is the most popular variety there right now. Spanish brown, which I don't have pictures of, but it's there are a couple new varieties there. CDC Spanish brown, number 3 and 4. Beluga or black or Indian head, it's got all those 3 names, is another type of lentil that's not grown conventionally, but I know it's grown organically. And I've seen it a few years ago, and it's got the white cotyledon, and it is also fairly popular with organic growers. I'll talk a little about genetics the last 20 years for little breeding for grower satisfaction, because the breeders have done such a good job of making this a crop that's much more easy to grow for farmers. This is probably the most important slide in my whole presentation here today. And what these apply to all of the lentil types I've just talked about, except beluga. I don't think it applies to the black or beluga lentil. But what they've bred is higher potting, and so we had a problem in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with this crop. It was the pods they'd grow near some of the high yielding pods are right close to the soil surface, right almost laying on the soil surface. So they've bred them to have higher potting. So they're 2 to 3 inches. There's a lot of them are 3 inches from the soil surface now. And so with land rolling after seeding, this really helps to reduce harvest challenge. It helps you to be able to get your cutter bar from your swath or combine down closer to the soil surface, but it helps you to be able to capture those lower hanging pods without getting dirt dag into your combine and things like that. Their newer varieties have higher yielding, but they also have lodging resistance. And this is interesting because they've bred a larger stem base into these lentils. And so the lower part of the stem, where it would usually lodge if it's got heavy seed set on it, it doesn't do that anymore. I haven't seen that happen at all with these new ones. It's very, very fascinating. So that helps with harvest ease as well. Disease resistance, these are foliar diseases. So Ascochyta was traditionally our worst disease, just a real struggle for the farmers that started growing these crops in the 70s and into the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But all the varieties I've seen now have really good resistance to Ascochyta blight. That's been the worst disease. There's still some anthracnose. It's a little more complicated disease to manage genetically. They're getting on top of it, but you'll still notice some of that if you get lots of moisture in June and early July. Early maturing and determinate versus indeterminate. So that's why lentils can now be grown in the thin black soil zone and not and in the little wetter areas. So determinants and indeterminates means that if there's moisture, like rainfall and moisture, or plus extra nitrogen in the soil in July, the older varieties used to flower and not go to seed. They used to flower and not go to seed. But now, if you get that extra moisture in July, which we sometimes get, seems like climate change is changing things. And so we get, it's not as dry. Sometimes this year is extremely dry, but some years isn't. It used to be that these would just not go to seed, but now they are. So they've built in determinants into these lentil varieties, and that helps them to be able to grow, helps us to be able to grow them more into the wetter areas like the thin black soil zone. Challenges of lentil waterlogging. You'll notice on the right that these are fields where they've had some water, some rainfall, and it flooded the roots out. The roots are very tender. They're the most tender of all our crops for waterlogging. So if you're going to grow these crops in the wetter areas like the thin black soil zone, you want to grow them on fine textured soil like clay or clay loam. Um, there's still a lot of growers that grow lentil on clay or clay loam soil in the brown and dark brown soil zones. There's not as big a risk as water. However, we're getting a lot of rainfall. However, you want to stay away from fields, even in those soil zones that have large low areas, like we're talking 20 or 30 acres of low area. You can still get into some trouble there. This one is the next areas. You got a couple low areas on some clay soil that had a little bit of waterlogging, but the rest of the fields are benefiting greatly from those rainfalls, so they'll make up the difference in yield. Root rots are a challenge. I have a Fusarium, Pythium, Rhizoctonium, and Phanomyces. The Phanomyces is a recent root rot, and it's occurring in heavy clay soils where pea and lentil are grown frequently. And I've emphasized that one because it's a really serious disease, and it's mostly on clay soils where you've had these crops frequently in the rotation. Now, on the left is a picture of field peas, and the indicator for, like, if you have some foliage it's not looking so good and you pull it up, and if those roots are brown on the left hand side, these are peas, not lentils, but it shows the same symptoms as would be in lentil. On the left side, if you get that caramel colored root, that's a strong indicator that you've got a Phanomyces as opposed to the whiter roots on the right side. So you take those, you send them to the lab to get it confirmed. The lower left-hand side is a picture of Fusarium root rot. If you're having some problems with the plant, looks kind of off in the foliage, cut open the root, and if it's got that red streak through it, that means it's Fusarium root rot. Field selection. Thought I'd mention a bit about this. Many growers grow lentils on cereal stubble. It's the most common. As I said before, you want good drainage to prevent waterlogging, low in nitrogen so that your rhizobia nitrogen fixation works well for you. I just want to mention that conventional growers are finding leaving the stubble high is important. I realize for organic growers this maybe isn't possible because you may want to get in and control some weeds before seeding, and that would kind of plow down the straw. But it's very interesting that leaving the stubble high, there are some organic growers going more to minimum or zero tills. So what it does, it helps to increase the lentil yield because it reduces the soil moisture evaporation prior to the closure of the lentil canopy. So, and it also, interestingly enough, if you plant lentil into high stubble from the year before, they'll pod higher as well, and that'll help you with harvest, getting the cutter bar low to the soil surface. Um, Choosing a field, you want to leave 4 years between pea and lentil, or lentil and lentil, or pea and pea, because on the Canadian prairies, because you've got problems with root rots. If a Phanomyces, the serious root rot, is in your clay soils, then you want to leave 6 years between pea and lentil in the rotation. I'll mention a bit about land rolling. We do this for harvest ease. Even though these crops, lentil is potting a lot higher, you still want to go in after seeding and knock the rocks down. If you have rocks in your field, push them into the soil with these steel rollers. You can see it on the right there. Very popular with lentil production. Break up some dirt lumps and smooth out the ridges, and this will help you get the combine and swather cutter bar low enough to get the low hanging pods. You can roll right after seeding. Many growers roll after seeding, but if you don't have time, or if you get some rainfalls that compromise your activities in the field in the spring, then you can actually roll right up to the 5 to 7 node stage. And the picture and diagram in the lower right hand corner shows you the size of 5 to 7 node stage. They're pretty small. These plants are uh, are small, but and it's we call node stages because the leaves are actually compound leaves, and so they got leaflets. So when we start mentioning leaves, it can get confusing with leaflets. So the nodes are those little nudges that you can see in the diagram. Those are nodes. Interestingly enough, there's two nodes one at the soil surface and one below the soil surface. So actually, and if you get frost in the spring, you can actually seed this crop very early in the spring, end of April, beginning of May. If you get a frost and it freezes off this little seedling, it'll come back from one of those two lower nodes. So interesting little point there. It's important to roll later in the morning because at night all our plants sort of take on moisture, and this is called turgor pressure. They get rigid in the stems. So if you roll first thing in the morning, you're going to break those little stems off. So it's important to wait until 10 or 11 in the morning to roll so that when the plants are more pliable. Also, rolling later in the morning, you avoid rolling wet plants, which can actually spread disease around the fields. Chickpea is asked to mention a few things about chickpea. So in the middle, we've got the market classes. We got Desi and we got Kabuli. So Desi is a smaller seed. It's more angular. It's got a thicker seed coat and it's darker in color. And its utilization is it's split for flour or dal. Kabuli, also called Garbanzo bean, is a larger seed. It's more rounded. It's thin seed coat, and it's a cream-colored seed, and it's canned actually and used in salads. So when you're in the cities, or like some of you live in, sorry, well, I don't go to the city much, but when I go, there's salad bars and things like that in restaurants. And when you see those large chickpeas in there in the salads, that's the kabuli or garbanzo bean.
And Neil, I'm just going to quickly interrupt, but we just have around just 5 more minutes left.
That sounds good.
Thanks.
Challenges, ascochyta blight. It's a very serious plant disease in chickpea. Longer maturity as well. The Desi's 110 days, Kabuli's 120 days. So this is a challenge because you can get frost near the harvest time. So they have indeterminate growth habits. So as I mentioned before, advantages of chickpea: there's harmful insects are repelled. The leaves, the stems, and the pods of this plant, they secrete a malic acid, and it's really distasteful for insects like grasshoppers and other harmful insects. And chickpea advantage is it really does well in low rainfall areas because it's very drought tolerant. Chickpea flax intercropping is some growers have done that, and it's starting to get popular. There's more research going on. So flax actually acts as a nurse crop for the chickpea. There's not much yield advantage. You got a low amount of flax planted with an optimal amount of chickpea, and so what this does, you can see on the right, you can see 2 rows of chickpea interspersed with 2 rows of flax. And so this helps to prevent ascochyta spread in the chickpea. So you can understand when the chickpea does get disease, the spores are going to blow, but they can't really blow to the rest of the chickpea because they're intercepted by those physical barriers of the flax. It also causes the chickpea to be more determinate because they compete for light and water with the flax. Chickpea matures earlier due to the competition with the flax as well. Just a couple of things about fava bean. It's a longer growing season crop, 130 days in the north, so you really do have a risk of frost before harvest. So you have to seed fairly early. Seeding by May 7th is the best. Seeding after May 15th is not really recommended. It's a cool climate. So it's pretty much confined to the dark soil zone. It's a great crop though, if you can grow it there. It's a larger seed, so it can plug the air seeder. You have to slow down, and the market can be a little dicey at times. Um, Market classes, malic is the large seeded one. It's got a tannin which people like to eat, and it's sold as human edible market in the Middle East and Asia. It's got the large seed, so it can plug the seed openers. You got to slow right down you still have some problems sometimes. And livestock, you know, if these get frozen in the fall, it's nice to be able to sell them into the livestock market because you can't sell them at the human consumption market. But livestock won't eat this one because of the tannin. It's non-palatable. But there are low tannin types. Snowbird is the most common, but it's a large seed as well. But it can be sold into the livestock market if it gets frozen in the fall. Snowdrop is a smaller, rounder seed that's been developed on the prairies. Doesn't plug the air drills, but and it's mostly confined for livestock because the seed size is not compatible for what the consumer wants. The advantages of this is it's just a great nitrogen fixer. So with a lot of biomass, it fixes nitrogen all through the growing season. So with that large amount of biomass and nitrogen, it's great for a green manure crop. And the biomass plus the high protein makes for good silage. If you grow the low tannin types, it's great standability, as I mentioned earlier. So it's a crop that's got a lot of potential. Now, just 2 slides left here. One of the challenges is lygus bug. Lygus is common in canola, but it actually will leave canola fields once favas start to flower because it just, or pardon me, start to go to seed. So lygus enters from canola fields into fava fields. It sucks the developing seed in the top right-hand corner picture there, and it downgrades the seed, so the consumer doesn't like that, and it gets downgraded. The other challenge is pea leaf weevil. This is a weevil that causes leaf notching, but that plant will actually grow through that. And the main problem with pea leaf weevil is it chews on the leaves and it travels down. The insect travels down to lay eggs near the nodules, and then worms or larvae hatch and they eat the nitrogen fixing nodules, and so you get nitrogen compromised in your fava bean plant because of the pea leaf weevil. There we go, folks.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. That was fantastic. And thank you for probably perfectly getting to the 30-minute mark. We appreciate it. We know that's hard to condense down.
No problem.
So again, if you have any questions for Neil, I saw a few in the chat and we'll make sure to get to those in the question period. But now I'll pass it over to Hugo to introduce Aitre. Thank you.
In the meantime, Tiara, can you make me able to activate my enable share screen?
I think, Rebecca, would you be able to do that?
En attendant, je vais présenter Aitre. En fait, Aitre est agronome.
I'm going to present Aitre. He's with the MAPAC in Quebec. So he's here today to talk to us about quinoa and about he has studied in agronomics in Quebec City. So I'm going to share his presentation with you all.
Est-ce que vous la voyez?
Can you see it?
Aitre, je changerai les diapos.
Oui, on la voit, mais elle n'est pas en mode.
Oops.
Excuse-moi, j'ai coupé ton son sans faire exprès. Désolé.
Sorry, I didn't mean to mute your sound. Oh, I just wanted to get it into the slide mode, into the presentation mode.
La voit la présentation, mais elle n'est pas en mode diaporama.
Ah, elle n'est pas en mode diaporama.
What did you say? Oh, I just wanted to put it into slide mode. Oh, he's not in slide mode? Okay, I'll try to put it on.
Vous la voyez pas en mode diaporama, hein?
On voit une partie on voit les slides à gauche.
Okay.
I can see the slides on the left.
Je pense qu'il faut la mettre en diaporama avant de la partager.
You have to put it into slide mode before sharing. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, it was my screen. That was why I couldn't share it.
En attendant qu'il puisse la partager, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Ça me fait
While we're
plaisir.
waiting, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today. And after Neil's presentation,
Merci beaucoup. Donc,
thank you to all the participants today. And when I was sent the when I was sent the invitation this morning,
pour échanger sur ces cultures. Donc, c'est pas
so today I'm not acting as an expert. I just wanted to present these crops to you. I want to open the door to discussing this with these other experts that are present today for this webinar. So I don't know if it's going to work, this presentation. Do you see it? Yes, I see it. Okay, so let's try it like this. So when Hugo contacted me, thanks very much for doing that. I'm very happy to be sharing this with you today. But when he called on me today, I decided to talk about these crops because I find that they're beneficial, but they're very little talked about. So here you can see the overview of the presentation. I'm going to try to speak slowly because I know with my accent, it might not be a little bit more difficult to follow. So I'm going to talk about the crop benefits when used in rotation, the agronomic aspects, and agronomic challenges, seeds, and diversification opportunities. So you're going to see that it's not as detailed as Neil's presentation, but I'm going to start with crimson clover. So why is there such an interest for this crop as a green manure? Thanks, Hugo. Next. So why choose crimson clover? Obviously, it's used as a cover crop and also as an alley crop. So it's because you can broadcast the seeds, because the seeds are quite a bit heavier than other types of clover. So it's about twice as heavy as red clover, for example. So you can broadcast the seeds quite easily, even though it's not always the case. It's not always the way that's used. It doesn't survive over the winter, so it's quite easy to leave in your fields and it destroys it. It just disappears itself. So it's very useful in organic and conventional. So obviously weeds cause a big problem. But so if they can turn into weeds, so it's good that they die over winter. It's a benefit. It won't affect your main crop. And it has a low environmental impact as well. We don't need to water it. We don't need to use herbicides with it. And it's one that attracts bees. And so there's often deals that are made with different honey producers because that's a very good benefit.
Crimson clover does not produce honey, but will attract bees.
Okay.
Just wanted to make a clarification there on the translation. It doesn't actually produce honey, but the crimson clover, but it will attract bees to do so. So another benefit is that it can be used as forage or a pasture crop. So in eastern Quebec, we've had a lot of drought in the last few years. So we try to use it in order to have some forage, backup forage. It can also be used against many damaging insects when we intercrop. But of course, it brings a lot of nitrogen to the soil, and it can reduce your use of nitrogen fertilizers by 40 to 60 kilograms for the subsequent crops, and 60 to 80, kilograms for use in other crops. So it also helps with avoiding erosion and maintaining the microbiology in the soil. So it's a very important crop in terms of soil health. Speaking of which, here are two studies that were done in 2019 in Abitibi. So in difficult conditions in Quebec. So this is the above ground biomass comparison on the left here. So this is the difference between the crimson clover and the other types of clover in terms of how much. So this is on both sites. And speaking of the nitrogen benefits, the above ground biomass for crimson clover produced more nitrogen than other types of clover. And we can see this in terms of carbon as well. In terms of above ground carbon, it was more beneficial than other types of clover in our trials. So we see the same results in 2020. So we can see that in terms of both carbon and nitrogen, it is very beneficial. And we can see this on the charts that it's in fact better than other types of clover. The next slide, please. There you go. So this has to do with the second graph in 2020. In terms of nitrogen fixation. What I was saying was that many growers have been testing crimson clover, and I would invite you to go and see this testimonial. I put the link here. Sorry for the delay. I'm just waiting for Hugo to change the slide over. So in terms of agronomic aspects, with this crop, it's a biannual crimson clover that rarely survives in the winter. So you don't need to destroy it. And it likes cool soil that's rich in phosphorus, well drained, and with a pH level above 5. So in our trials, we found that 5.5 pH was about the limit for this crop. So it's quite important, and we mentioned it before for legumes in general. You need to use inoculum. And it's the same one as for white or red clover. So that's important to realize that it does help fix atmospheric nitrogen. So in terms of the seeding rate, it's 15 to 25 kilograms per hectare. Some studies say that it's more, but depending on your use, you can put up to 25 kilograms per hectare of seeds. Next, please. So in terms of the seeds, we can broadcast them. So that's easier than with other types of clover. Broadcasting is never a uniform way of seeding, though. So we can also put them, we can also seed them in rows, and you have to put them about a quarter-inch deep in clay soils, and a 1/2 to 3/4 inches in sandy soils, sandier soils. So during the seeding period, you should use as much as you need, but not too early, because you need to do it when there's no frost. So you have to try to leave 6 to 8 weeks before the first frost. You can't plant after that. So as I mentioned before, you can use it as forage, but it won't come back the next year. So you have to plant it again. So it's important not to
And it doesn't
plant
tolerate
this
poorly drained soils either.
into frozen soil. This is a very important consideration.
Other challenges. Studies indicate that it can be a secondary host to the cornworm. So we have to look at that. Doesn't tolerate dry soils. It requires a certain level of humidity. It also doesn't compete as well with certain types of weeds. If you have obviously major weed problems, then regardless of what intercrop you have, you can have competition. The sources that I found are here. Here you see the prices for in 2019, talking about $118.15 for a 25 kilogram bag. In 2020, it had increased by $3. Look at red clover, same weight bag. It's way more expensive, although it did come down quite a bit in 2020. I can't explain why it was reduced by almost 30%, but nevertheless, it remains much more expensive than crimson clover. Where can you find seeds? Most producers who sell forage crop seeds in Quebec will be able to provide some. Also, you can look at the registered seeds link here. And you'll find authorized distributors, sellers of these seeds in your region, your province. Also in Ontario, they have a link that you can also go to for seed sources. Here's a picture of the crimson clover at the seedling phase. The next picture, you see that the biomass is quite good. Here is the flowering stage.
Je vois qu'il y a des questions dans le chat, mais je vais essayer de.
On va prendre questions in the chat box, but we'll deal with those at the end. So let's move on to the garden pea, Pisum sativum. Which are the advantages, the benefits of using peas in the rotation? 2014, 98% of the peas in Canada were grown in the prairies. I know there are people here from the prairies at this webinar, but one of the buyers who contacted me this summer wanted peas.
À l'intérieur des distributeurs au Québec, quelqu'un qui pourrait lui fournir la quantité qu'il en voulait.
I wasn't able to find any suppliers here in Quebec to provide the quantities that he wanted. Had to go to the prairies for that. There are multiple uses depending on which variety we're talking about. You can have peas for human or consumption for animal feed. You can use them for green manure and as a forage crop. And let's not forget the nitrogen contribution. We're talking about over 190 kilograms per hectare when you're planting them as a green manure. Also, there's an interesting niche market here when we're talking about gluten, the gluten-free market. After all, peas are gluten-free. Another benefit is that peas can be grown alone or intercropped, depending on the variety. It's a great, of course, source of protein and energy for ruminants. We see a study here from Corbett and from Pelletier that indicates that protein is good. Also, the fact that you have peas intercropped with, for example, barley will enable you to reduce the risk of Ascochyta blight in peas, which would lead to monetary losses. Peas can be grown in most regions, including colder ones, so it is good a crop for Canada. In Quebec, I know the climate a bit better, and it definitely works here. The agronomic aspects, like cool and dry conditions, it can germinate at 4.5 degrees C. So that's about only when only 3 centimeters of the soil has been unfrozen and can even tolerate light frost. Talking about well-drained sandy to clay soils. But it's better to use sandy loams. And I'll explain why. The pH is very important. You need to apply lime if you're under 6.2. You've got to try to get up to 6.5 to 7.
Donc, il faut préparer, avoir un bon lit de semence.
You need a good seed bed and seed in the spring as soon as the conditions are conducive. That is, the soil has got to be up to 4.5 degrees C at least. Now, let's look at some more agronomic aspects. You have to inoculate with Rhizobium strain. You can also plant with either pneumatic or conventional drill. But if you're using a conventional drill, you need to use the big openings because they're pretty big seeds, obviously. The seeding rate varies depending on the cultivar and the size of the seeds. In organic systems, it's 156 seeds per square meter.
Une densité de plants d'environ 100 plants par
mètre. If you're
carré.
targeting 14 seeds per square foot for a density of 100 plants per square meter. In conventional systems, you would only want to go up to 75 to 85 plants per square meter or 7 to 8 plants per square foot with a spacing of 15 to 33 centimeters.
Entre les rangs de 15 à 33 cm, dépendamment de qu'est-ce qu'on vise comme production là-dessus.
planted at a depth of 3 to 8 centimeters.
Encore quelques minutes à Ytré.
Parfait, je m'en viens. Donc, au niveau de
Just a
la
couple of minutes left.
j'ai pris la fertilisation, les grilles de
Now let's
fertilisation.
look at fertilization. This was updated this year.
Ce qui était utilisé. On utilise
And
de l'azote à
you
30
can apply nitrogen at 30 kilograms per hectare broadcast
convertir l'azote atmosphérique.
before planting
Quand même, ça prend quand même un début, donc c'est quand même important de les mettre.
and
Au niveau
incorporated.
c'est vraiment variable, dépendamment de la texture du sol. On
It
parle
depends on the soil tilth.
penser que c'est la texture fine. Et
For phosphorus, for phosphorus, we're talking about phosphorus now. So it's from G1. For G1, you have a different approach than for G2, G3.
Très important de déterminer combien de kilogrammes de P2O5 qu'on peut apporter. Et on
And
peut
that
aller
will determine the number of kilograms of P2O5 that you need to apply per hectare. Potassium.
Ces critères aussi vont avec
Here
la
too,
texture.
we have to look at the soil texture.
Kilogrammes
You can go up to 30 kilograms of K2O per hectare.
Donc, j'ai fait un peu le parallèle aussi pour vous montrer qu'est-ce qui était utilisé avant.
I'm drawing the parallel here with what was used before. And so you go to the next slide. So here is what was used
Et ses
in
collaborateurs.
the study done by Christine Landry et al.
On allait carrément jusqu'à 160 kg de.
They were going up to 160 kilograms per hectare of P2O5. That's a lot.
D'autres personnes, d'autres provinces, donc
Other provinces
j'ai voulu sortir ça aussi par rapport au travail qu'ils ont fait, qu'il y en a
were
c'est en fonction de l'analyse de sol, mais quand
did other studies.
soit on n'en met pas ou parfois quand on en met quand même aussi beaucoup. Donc jusqu'à 170.
In the US, they didn't put any. In some instances, in other cases, they went up to 170 kilograms. Did the same exercise. If you look at the next slide with potassium.
Et maintenant, on parle jusqu'à 60. Et alors que ailleurs aussi, on en met quand même jusqu'à 180, dépendamment de.
It can go up to 180 in certain instances. In Michigan, for example, here. So you see how much variation there is in the amount of this element that is applied. More agronomic aspects. Yields can range from 2.3 to over 3 tons per hectare. According to CRAC 2019, when you're up to 3.2 tons, there can be quite a lot of residue that's left on the soil. That's 80 to 90 days for determinate growth varieties. Oh, sorry. So we're still talking about up to 5 tons per hectare of residues at times. For determinate growth varieties, the growth period is 80 to 90 days. Some varieties need up to 110 days. You can harvest them directly or windrowing them. When you think that there is uneven maturity or there's a strong weed pressure, then you may windrow. The humidity is also a very important factor when you're harvesting. It needs to be 14 to 20% with conveyor or a grain auger. If you're using a grain auger, you have to set it at low speed. And again, humidity should be at 14 to 20% max.
Du poids, c'est quoi? C'est le chaume. Il n'est pas très efficace pour la rétention de la neige.
The problem with peas is that the stubble doesn't do much for snow retention. So you're going to need a fall cereal to if you want to work on that. We also have powdery mildew or white rot on the prairies, which reduces yield by 15%. But most of the varieties that are have been developed are resistant to this disease. Another issue is the low ruminant digestive speed. If you're using peas as a protein supplement in feed. Finally, it's important to choose the right cultivar for the right use. because if you buy a seed cultivar, if you're using it only for forage, well, you may spend too much money. So the challenges are we have to adapt it to the feed versus the preconceived feed. If you're introducing peas, you have to be able to adapt it. And you also have to think in terms of feed uniformity. So what's the
les grains de céréales vont se retrouver en dessous. Donc le volume aussi.
Because what happens is that there's can be separation between the pea seeds and the grain seeds. So you have to make sure that it's mixed properly. Also, there's a question of how much volume you can produce in terms of what the market will bear. There's another issue with maturity, with synchronizing with the maturity of the companion crop. Finally, there's an impact on profitability because of the seed cost. It is an important aspect. You need to be able to ensure that you can make this work for you in terms of financially. Those are the challenges.
Oui, je vais aller rapidement. Donc, il y a aussi l'averse. Donc, pour les variétés
we also have some more challenges here. We have lodging with indeterminate varieties. The roots are fairly close to the surface, so they're vulnerable in dry conditions. If you have drought, they're also an attractive host for certain nematodes. But they also provide cover to many beneficials, such as ladybugs and predaceous mites. Another aspect is the distant time, the amount of time between in the rotation because of sclerotinia. There are numerous varieties, almost all are semi-leafless, with varieties that have determinate growth for human consumption and indeterminate for forage. More than 90% of the peas in Canada are yellow seed cultivars. Where can you find the seeds? Seed producers in Quebec. Again, look here on the same site for the registered seeds in Canada and the suppliers thereof, Canadian Grain Commission. What about the price? For forage peas, 25 kilogram bag in 2019, $34, down to $32 in 2020. And for organic seed sales, we're talking about $540 to $625 per ton. What are the diversification opportunities? Well, it's adapted to several different regions. There's this growing demand for plant proteins. There can be the niche markets such as marrow fat for snacks. Dry peas is a crop insured by the FADQ. And there's an opportunity created by COVID in terms of a much increased demand for local produce.
Quelques variétés de
Here are some pea varieties.
Justement pour au niveau de la Commission canadienne de grains. Suivant aussi.
That you can get from the Grain Commission. Or in conclusion,
en conclusion, le trèfle, par exemple,
Crimson Clover offers various agronomic, environmental, and financial benefits.
Sur la santé des sols au niveau des
nitrogen fixation and also other economic benefits. It can be used in either organic or conventional systems, but it's important to choose the right site and the right rotation in order to make best use of it.
C'est une excellente culture à mettre en rotation pour son apport la diversification de la
in rotation because of their nitrogen input for diversification purposes and because they are adapted to most regions, but you have to choose the right cultivar for your use. When it comes to seeds, you should have a contract and be sure to meet the market's requirements.
Donc, je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you, Aitre.
Vous avez un coordonné à la fin de la présentation.
And my email is there at the end of the presentation in case you wish to contact me. And yes, the presentation will be going out afterwards so that you'll be able to get that information and contact Aitre as needed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aitra, and thank you, Neil. Really appreciate you like taking these huge topics and really trying to like fit them into a small time period. So we really appreciate that. So just quickly, we just have about maybe like 7 minutes to do a question period. But I'll just remind you, you can click on the top right hand. There's a view button and it'll say gallery or speaker view. So you can click there to do gallery view so you can see everyone. If you're going to ask a question, if you're able to, you can either ask it in the chat and we can ask it for you. We have 2 in there that I'll start off with that were already put into the chat. Or you can put your hand up using the reaction button and I can call on you and you can speak to the presenters or ask your question directly to the presenters. So I will first just ask the first question, and we had a question from Mark asking about the suitability of pulses for other regions of Canada, for example, Southern Ontario. So that if either Neil or Aitra, you want to touch on that.
Southern Ontario, I'm not so familiar, but of course I've been there and looked at some crops. Soybean is a sort of a pulse / oil seed that it's really an oil seed, but it does fix nitrogen. Soybean is pretty ideal in Southern Ontario. It's not that there's quite a bit grown in Manitoba, but not much in excuse me, Saskatchewan and Alberta because it does require warm evening temperatures, night temperatures. Field pea is our most versatile, excuse me, of all our pulse crops on the Canadian prairies. So without being in Ontario and being an agronomist there, I would suggest that field pea would probably be the most probable because it is the most versatile out here. Lentil, chickpea, as I was saying, fava bean are certain areas. Field pea are ubiquitous. They can be grown anywhere on the prairies.
Our second question that we had in the chat.
Thierry?
En fait, je voulais ajouter par rapport à ça, c'est sûr que pour demander les autres provinces, oui, est-ce que je peux compléter un peu, si vous permettez?
Allez-y, Aïtré.
Oui. Oui, c'est bon. Donc, c'est ça, on dit, c'est ça, les légumineuses dans d'autres régions comme d'autres provinces, Ontario, le Québec. Le soya au Québec, c'est quand même très répandu. Ça, on n'a pas à démontrer ça. Le pois, comme M. Neil l'a mentionné, c'est quand même une culture passe-partout qu'on retrouve un peu partout. Donc, on en fait pas mal au Québec aussi. Et la gourgane, la févrole, comme quelqu'un l'a mentionné tantôt, nous, on a fait des projets dans le bas du fleuve ici. Et il y en a plein. Il y en a aussi, moi, je dirais, la niche écologique de la gourgane févrole au Québec, c'est le Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. N'oubliez pas d'aller manger la soupe à la gourgane là-bas. Là. Donc, c'est quand même très bien. Mais je pense que pour l'Ontario, il faudrait voir.
You know, the garbanzo soup is very popular, so that's actually grown in the Lac-Saint-Jean region of Quebec. So people can go and see the website to check which varieties work in their region.
Thank you. Our next question, it was, sorry. Are inoculants necessary in order for legumes or crimson clover to develop a beneficial amount of rhizobia in the soil?
We advocate applying rhizobia every time. Our soil in Western Canada has a certain amount of rhizobia, but since they're species specific, there's different rhizobia for lentil, pea, fava bean, chickpea. It's important to inoculate prior to each time you grow them. Now, if you're going to grow lentil every 4 years, you're going to have some of that rhizobia left over, but still it's cheap. It's not that expensive, and it takes a little bit of time to do, but not that much. So we say it's cheap insurance to actually apply rhizobia, inoculate your seeds every time you seed a pulse crop.
Oui, un peu en complément avec ça, je suis bien d'accord avec Neil. C'est certain que
I
quand
agree with Neil.
il y en a des rhizobiums dans le sol, mais c'est pas toujours les bons, c'est pas tout le temps.
There may be rhizobia in the soil, but it might not be in the right place. So in order to optimize the fixation of atmospheric nitrogen, we know that legumes are going to, in fact, do that. So if we don't have the right amount for the species that we're growing, we're not going to get the ideal harvest. Not all legumes need the same type of rhizobium, so you do need to try to create cultures. And if we want to optimize fixation of atmospheric nitrogen, it's important to apply it.
Thank you. I think we might have time for one more quick question. If anybody wants to throw one in the chat or turn on their video and audio, they can ask one last question. So we have a question from Jessica. She says, thank you for including seed catalogs and distributors in your presentation. Do you have any tips for saving legume varieties?
Yeah, all the pulses I talked about, including pea, field pea, you can save them, save your own seed, and it should be viable. In conventional farming, we suggest buying certified seed every 5 years because you get those traits. So when I was talking about those lentil traits, those 8 different new traits in the last 20 years, that can start to break down after 5 or 6 years. So it'd be good to, I realize organic doesn't have so much certified seed per se, but, I think you can purchase certified seed from conventional market and apply it to your organic program if you can't find the correct seed in organic, if you try 3 different places, something like that. I don't know the rules real well. So you can save the seed, yeah, if it's down at good moisture content, 13-14% moisture content and less than 15 degrees Celsius in your bin, it will stay there for several years, and you can keep dipping into that. But and then you can buy, when you buy certified seed, you maybe want to just buy a little bit for 20 or 30 acres, and then you would call blowing it up. You make a bunch more, and then you don't have to spend quite so much money on certified seed. Does that answer your question, Jessica?
She says yes.
Oui, mais c'est pour répondre un peu pour les gens de Québec, j'ai mentionné tantôt que, par
For the people
exemple,
in Quebec, I mentioned malic acid. We often, it's important to use certified seed. As for seed growers, I don't want to engage in favoritism, but if you go to the site that I put up, you're going to see all of the different seed growers and how they and their distribution. If you want to have good yields, then it's important to go and find the right types of seeds. So I suggest that you go and search and find the right type.
Thank you. I think unfortunately we don't have enough time for any more questions, but I will be sharing all the links as well as maybe some extra information on legumes and these different crops that we talked about. I'll be sending that in an email shortly. We have also recorded this, and we will be sending this video out once it's all put together. So I will just quickly share our outro PowerPoint.
En attendant, Tiara, on a une question de Anouk.
There's a question from Anouk for Neil.
What about oats with peas? Synchronicity at the 4-leaf stage of the oats to be able to harrow the oats before sowing the peas. Did you get that, Neil?
I didn't get that. Sorry. Could you please repeat?
I have a question in the chat in English.
Oh, what about oats with peas? Synchronicity at the 4-leaf stage.
Avant ça, what about the oats with peas?
So Ayatri talked about peas. I could speak to that, but Ayatri might want to talk about that. Intercropping oats with peas by the sounds of it. All these crops I talked about can be intercropped, and there's lots of interesting intercropping going on. As far as harrowing the oats before, not sure what the rationale is there. You're harrowing the oats for weed control before sowing the peas? Because I know in organic farming there's harrowing that goes on for weed control because you cannot use herbicides. So after the crop is up. Oh, okay. So that's what it is. So the question was synchronicity at the 4-leaf stage of the oats to be able to harrow the peas before. You know, this is some of these things haven't been researched, but there has been some good research going on at the University of Saskatchewan with rotary hoes, harrows, and inter-row cultivation. Catherine Stanley and Alba, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his that may be his last name. And so there's good research there talking about rotary hoe, harrow, and inter-row cultivation with various pulses, and I think pulse with intercropped with some cereals. I'm just trying to remember the name of the professor, Shirtliff, Dr. Shirtliff. So you find more information there on that. These options all work. I mean, if you're gonna try and control the weeds, you have to apply some of these harrowing when these crops are up and you seed a little heavier so that you don't compromise the overall plant density too much, and then plant in peas later. I mean, I haven't done it and I haven't seen it, but it sounds like a viable option. And you always try these things in small acres first. And do comparisons if you can. Do your own field comparisons. Maybe do it without the peas and with the peas. Does Ayatri have some comments on that? Because he talked about peas.
Ben, je sais pas si, en tout cas, je sais que peut-être la personne, pour les cultures, le mélange à avoine pois, c'est quelque chose qui est fréquent. Ça, c'est fait très souvent ou mélange.
I know that pea mixes are used often with barley, for example. As for harrowing, Quebec is. I'm not sure about using. Anyway, the person I could speak with the person to give them some indications about how to do this kind of culture, which is quite often used in Quebec. So that's something that we could discuss together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
I think now, I'm sorry to be that person to end a discussion, but I think now we do need to go into the just the quick closing and upcoming events that we have. So I will just quickly share my screen. Okay. So again, thank you so much to Neil and Ayatri. I know we didn't make it easy for you with all this content, but we really appreciate you. Just with all your insights and the experiences you shared, as well as the links that you shared, we'll definitely make sure to send that out to everybody. A big thank you to Peter and Adrian, who have been simultaneously translating for us. Thank you so much. We really couldn't do this without you. And a big thank you to the regional coordinators, Hugo, Rebecca, and Caitlin, for keeping things going and making sure everything behind the scenes was working. So we would love to get your feedback and your insights, and to learn how we can serve the seed community the best way that we can. So we've just thrown up a poll, just asking for your feedback on this webinar. If you could quickly answer that, that would be great. It is anonymous and it's just for internal use, so we can just get better and better at making webinars. And if you have any additional comments or feedback, feel free to send that to me. You can find my email at tiara.stokes@organicalberta.org. And again, I will be emailing everyone with the links and more information. I'll just pass it off to Hugo to talk about an upcoming event.
Oui. C'est ça, on vous invite le 10 septembre à McGill pour visiter.
So we are inviting you to McGill on September 10th. We hope to see you there. It's for cultivating legumes and pulses, and it'll be held at McGill.
Great, thank you. And lastly, there are a lot of ways to stay connected. So we have put the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security website up there. We have a few more webinars coming up. The next one is next week on July 29th. It's all about beets and breeding for flavor and color. So thank you again. We're really excited to have you all here for this discussion, and we hope to see you at another one in the future. Thank you.